The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and despair. A sterile prison where Caleb woke to a world that felt like a stranger's. His head throbbed. His memories a shattered mosaic. And the man sitting beside him broad-shouldered, with eyes like a stormy Pacific, was a mystery who called himself his husband. Ethan's voice, low and guarded, said, "You're awake." Thank God. But his touch was cold, as if Caleb were a fragile artifact he feared breaking. Caleb's accident had stolen 3 years of his life, including every moment of his marriage to Ethan. The doctors called it retrograde amnesia, a cruel thief that left him grasping at shadows. He studied Ethan's face-rugged jaw, dark stubble, a scar above his left brow, and felt nothing but a hollow ache. "I don't know you," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he looked away, the silence between them heavier than the fog rolling over San Francisco Bay. Their home in the Mission District was no refuge. The walls were lined with photos of a life Caleb couldn't claim, him and Ethan laughing at a pride parade, their hands intertwined on a beach at sunset, a wedding kiss under a canopy of stars. Each image was a stab, a reminder of what he'd lost. Ethan moved through the house like a ghost, cooking meals Caleb didn't taste, speaking in careful tones that hid something raw. "We were happy," Ethan said one night, his voice thick as he poured whiskey into a glass. "You loved me once." Caleb wanted to believe it, but the man before him felt more like a warden than a lover. Days bled into weeks, and Caleb pieced together fragments of their story. They'd met at a bookstore in the Castro, where Ethan, a firefighter with a hero complex, had teased Caleb, a graphic designer, about his obsession with dystopian novels. Their first date was a disaster: spilled coffee, a missed train, but they'd laughed until dawn. Caleb learned this from old texts, from Ethan's reluctant stories. But the spark was gone. Ethan's warmth had frozen into distance, his touches rare and hesitant, as if Caleb's amnesia had broken something vital between them. Caleb's frustration grew like a storm. He spent hours sketching, trying to draw the man he used to be. But his pencil traced only questions. Why did Ethan flinch when Caleb asked about their fights? Why did their friends Lila, Marcus, Sarah exchange worried glances when Ethan left the room? One night, Caleb found a locked drawer in Ethan's desk, and when he asked about it, Ethan's face darkened. "Don't push, Caleb," he said, his voice a low growl. "Some things are better left alone." But Caleb couldn't let it go. He felt like a guest in his own life, tethered to a man whose love felt like obligation. At a support group for amnesia survivors, he met Jamie, a barista with kind eyes and a story of his own. Jamie's easy laughter was a balm, a contrast to Ethan's brooding silences. "You don't have to stay in a cage," Jamie said one evening over coffee, his hand brushing Caleb's. The touch sent a jolt through him. Not love, but a flicker of possibility. For the first time, Caleb wondered if he could start over. The idea of divorce came like a lightning strike. Caleb didn't plan it. The words spilled out during a quiet dinner, the kind where Ethan stared at his plate like it held the answers. "I think we should separate," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Ethan froze, his fork clattering to the table. The air turned electric, and Caleb braced for anger, for tears, for anything. But Ethan's response was a single word, sharp as a blade: "No." The refusal ignited something in Caleb. He pushed back, his voice rising. "I don't know who we were, Ethan. I can't live like this, pretending I'm someone I'm not." Ethan stood, his chair scraping the floor. And for a moment, Caleb saw something feral in his ice possessiveness. Desperation. A hunger that made his pulse race. "You don't get to walk away," Ethan said, stepping closer. his voice low and dangerous. Not after everything. Caleb's heart pounded, torn between fear and a strange, unnameable pull. He didn't understand Ethan's intensity, but it stirred something deep, a memory his body recognized even if his mind didn't. What's everything? He demanded. Tell me. Ethan, what are you hiding? Ethan's face crumpled, and for a moment, Caleb thought he'd speak. But Ethan turned away, grabbing his jacket and slamming the door behind him, leaving Caleb alone with the echo of his own question. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He wandered the house, touching objects that felt like relics, a leather jacket that smelled of Ethan's cologne, a sketchbook filled with his own drawings of a smiling Ethan. In the back of the sketchbook, he found a note in his own handwriting. Ethan, you're my anchor. Don't let me drift. The words hit like a punch, and Caleb sank to the floor, clutching the book. Who had he been to write that? And why did Ethan, his anchor, feel so far away? The next morning, Ethan returned, his eyes bloodshot and his voice softer. I'm sorry, he said, sitting across from Caleb at the kitchen table. I can't lose you again. The vulnerability in his tone was new, a crack in the wall he'd built. Caleb wanted to reach for him, to bridge the gap, but the locked drawer loomed in his mind. Then tell me the truth, Caleb said. All of it. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but it's not simple. He stood, motioning for Caleb to follow him to the desk. His hands shook as he unlocked the drawer, pulling out a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. These are yours, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. You wrote them to me before the accident. Before everything changed. Caleb's fingers trembled as he untied the ribbon, the paper soft and worn, as if Ethan had read them 1,000 times. The first letter began, My Alpha. You're the fire I'll never tame. Caleb's breath caught. The words were his, but they felt like a stranger's. He looked at Ethan, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. Read them, Ethan said, and maybe you'll remember who we were. Caleb sat on the couch. The letters spread before him like a map to a lost world. Each one was a piece of his past, written in his own looping scrawl, spilling with love, fear, and secrets. Ethan, you're my home, but I'm scared we're breaking. One read. Another, dated a month before the accident, was raw with pain. I saw you with him. Ethan, why won't you talk to me? Caleb's stomach twisted. Him. Who was this shadow in their story? Ethan sat across the room, watching Caleb with a mix of hope and dread. You wrote these during our rough patches, he said, his voice rough. We fought a lot that last year. Caleb traced the words, feeling their weight. Who's him? He asked, his voice sharp. Ethan's face paled, and he looked away, his hands clenching. It's not what you think, he said. It was never about love. The letters painted a picture of a marriage strained by Ethan's long hours at the fire station and Caleb's insecurities. Caleb had suspected Ethan of cheating, though the letters never named the other man. One entry, written in a frantic hand, chilled him. I followed you tonight. Ethan, I wish I hadn't. Caleb looked up, his heart racing. What did I see? He demanded. Ethan's silence was an answer, heavy and suffocating. Desperate for clarity, Caleb turned to their friends. Lila, a photographer with a sharp tongue, met him at a cafe in No Valley. You too were messy, she admitted, stirring her latte. Ethan was always the strong one, the alpha, but he shut down when things got hard. You thought he was hiding something. She hesitated, then added, You were right, but it wasn't an affair. Ask him about the station. Caleb confronted Ethan that night, the letters clutched in his hand. What happened at the fire station? He asked. Ethan's shoulders sagged, and he sank into a chair. It was a call, he said, his voice hollow. A bad one. A kid didn't make it. I couldn't talk about it. Caleb's anger faltered, replaced by a pang of sympathy. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Ethan's eyes met his, raw and unguarded. Because you were already slipping away. The revelation shifted something in Caleb. He saw Ethan not as a stranger, but as a man carrying wounds he couldn't share. Yet the distance remained. A chasm widened by Caleb's amnesia and Ethan's secrets. Caleb started spending more time with Jamie, whose warmth was a lifeline. One evening, as they walked through Golden Gate Park, Jamie stopped under a blooming cherry tree. You deserve to be happy, Caleb, he said, his voice soft. Even if it's not with him. The words lingered, and Caleb felt a pull toward Jimmy, a chance at something new, unburdened by a past he couldn't recall. But when he returned home, Ethan was waiting, his eyes blazing. You were with him again, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. I saw you. Caleb's heart skipped. It's not what you think, he said, echoing Ethan's earlier words. But Ethan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. And Caleb felt the air crackle with something primal. You're mine, Ethan whispered, his hand grazing Caleb's cheek. The touch was electric, stirring a memory Caleb couldn't grasp. They stood inches apart, the tension a living thing. Caleb wanted to push Ethan away, to demand space, but his body betrayed him, leaning into the heat of Ethan's hand. I don't know how to be yours, Caleb admitted, his voice breaking. Ethan's eyes softened, but the possessiveness remained, a fire that both scared and drew Caleb in. Then let me remind you, Ethan said, and for the first time since the accident, he kissed Caleb. The kiss was a storm fierce, desperate, and achingly familiar. Caleb's mind was blank, but his heart remembered, pounding with a rhythm that felt like home. When they pulled apart, Ethan's forehead rested against Caleb's, his breath ragged. I can't lose you, he said again. And Caleb saw the truth in his eyes. Ethan was fighting for them, even if Caleb didn't know how to fight back. But the letters haunted Caleb. The next day, he found one he hadn't read, tucked at the bottom of the stack. Ethan, I'm leaving. I can't keep chasing a ghost. The date was the day of his accident. Caleb's blood ran cold. Had he been running from Ethan? From their marriage? He looked at Ethan, who was cooking breakfast, oblivious to the storm brewing in Caleb's mind. Did I want to leave you? Caleb asked, his voice trembling. Ethan froze, the spatula clattering to the counter. You were angry, he said carefully, but you didn't mean it. Caleb wasn't sure he believed him. The doubt gnawed at him, and he began to dig deeper, searching for answers in their shared history. He found an old journal in the attic, his own, filled with entries about Ethan's late nights, his silences, and a name, Ryan. Ryan was at the station again. One entry read, Ethan won't tell me why he's there. Caleb's pulse raced. Who was Ryan? And why was Ethan hiding him? Caleb's search for Ryan became an obsession. The name was a splinter in his mind, a clue to the fracture in his marriage. He scoured old emails, social media, anything that might reveal the truth. Ethan noticed, his mood darkening with each question Caleb asked. Stop digging, Ethan said one night, his voice tight. You're chasing ghosts. But Caleb couldn't stop. He needed to know who he'd been, and why he'd wanted to leave. At a fire station barbecue, Caleb met Rihanna paramedic with a quick smile and a handshake that lingered too long. You're looking better, Ryan said, his tone familiar in a way that made Caleb's skin prickle. Ethan watched from across the yard, his eyes narrowing. Later, in the car, Ethan's silence was deafening. "Stay away from him," he said finally, his voice low. "He's trouble." Caleb's defiance flared. "Then tell me why," he shot back. Ethan didn't answer. The tension between them grew. A tightrope stretched to breaking. Caleb felt torn, drawn to Ethan's intensity, yet pulled toward the freedom Jamie offered. One night, Jamie invited Caleb to an art gallery opening, and Caleb went, craving a moment of lightness. The gallery was alive with color, and Jamie's laughter was a melody Caleb hadn't realized he needed. "You're glowing," Jamie said, his hand brushing Caleb's arm. Caleb smiled, but guilt tugged at him. He was still married, still tethered to a man he didn't fully understand. When Caleb returned home, Ethan was waiting, his face a mask of fury and hurt. "You're slipping away again," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "I can't watch it happen twice." Caleb's heart ached at the pain in Ethan's eyes, but his own frustration boiled over. "Then stop hiding things," he shouted. "Who's Ryan? Why was I leaving you?" Ethan flinched, as if the words were a physical blow. "Ryan was a friend," he said finally. He got too close. You thought it was more than it was." Caleb didn't believe him. The journal entries suggested more. A betrayal that cut deeper than Ethan admitted. He confronted Ryan at the station, his voice shaking. "What were you to Ethan?" he demanded. Ryan's smile faltered. "Just a friend," he said, but his eyes darted away, and Caleb knew he was lying. The truth was a wound, and Caleb felt it bleed into his marriage, into the fragile trust he'd tried to rebuild. That night, Caleb made a decision. He packed a bag, his hands trembling as he folded clothes he barely recognized. Ethan found him in the bedroom, his face pale. "Don't do this," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I'll tell you everything." But Caleb shook his head. "I need time," he said. "I need to know who I am without you." He left, driving to Jamie's apartment, where the door opened to a warmth that felt like a new beginning. But Ethan didn't let go. He called, texted, showed up at Jamie's coffee shop, his eyes wild with desperation. "You can't just erase us," he said one day, cornering Caleb outside the shop. "You loved me. You still do." Caleb's heart twisted, caught between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, and Ethan's face crumpled, his hand reaching for Caleb's before stopping short. Caleb spent weeks with Jamie, trying to build a new life. Jamie was patient, his touch gentle, but Caleb couldn't shake Ethan's shadow. One night, he found a voicemail from Ethan, his voice raw. "I messed up. Caleb. I should have fought for you harder. Come home." The words cracked something open in Caleb, a longing he couldn't name. He returned to the house, just to talk, but Ethan's presence overwhelmed him. They argued, voices rising, until Ethan grabbed Caleb's shoulders, his eyes blazing. "I'm not letting you go," he said, and kissed him again, a kiss that felt like a claim. Caleb pulled away, his mind a storm. "I need the truth," he said. Ethan nodded, his face weary. "Ryan was a mistake," he admitted. "Not an affair. But I leaned on him when things got bad. You saw us together and thought the worst." Caleb's chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Ethan's voice broke. "Because I was ashamed. I failed you." The confession was a turning point, but not a resolution. Caleb needed space to process, to decide if love could survive the wreckage of their past. He moved into a small apartment, spending his days sketching, trying to rebuild himself. But Ethan's letters knew once, written to the Caleb he was now, began arriving. "I see you," even if you don't see yourself. One read, I'll wait. Caleb read them alone, tears blurring the words, wondering if he could find his way back to the man who called him his home. Caleb's new apartment was small, a quiet space where he could breathe, but it felt incomplete without Ethan's presence. The letters kept coming, each one a thread pulling Caleb back to the life he'd lost. You used to dance with me in the kitchen, Ethan wrote. I miss your laugh. Caleb traced the words, his heart aching for a memory he couldn't grasp. He spent hours sketching Ethan's face, trying to capture the man who refused to let him go. One evening, Lila invited Caleb to a gallery show, where his old designs were on display. Seeing his work vibrant, bold, full of love stirred something in him. A piece titled Alpha caught his eye, a painting of Ethan, his eyes fierce and tender, painted by Caleb's own hand. The sight broke him open, and he realized he'd loved Ethan with a depth he couldn't deny, even if he couldn't remember it. Caleb called Ethan, his voice trembling. I saw the painting, he said. I need to know if we can start again. Ethan arrived at the apartment within the hour, his face a mix of hope and fear. They talked for hours, unraveling the pain of their past. Ethan admitted his mistakes, his silence, his reliance on Ryan, his failure to fight harder for Caleb's trust. Caleb shared his fear, his confusion, his longing to be whole again. I don't know if I'm the man you loved, Caleb said. Ethan took his hand, his touch steady. You're enough, he said. You've always been enough. They rebuilt slowly, step by tentative step. Ethan moved back in, and they navigated their new reality with care. Some days were hard, with Caleb's doubts flaring and Ethan's guilt resurfacing. But there were moments of light, cooking together, laughing at old photos, dancing in the kitchen to a song Caleb didn't know but felt in his bones. Jamie remained a friend, his kindness a reminder that Caleb had choices. But his heart chose Ethan. One night, under the stars in their backyard, Caleb found a new letter in Ethan's pocket. Caleb, you're my home, no matter what you remember, it read. Caleb looked at Ethan, his alpha, his anchor, and felt a spark of the love they'd built. I'm not leaving, Caleb said, his voice steady. Ethan's smile was radiant, and he pulled Caleb close, their kiss a promise of a future they'd write together. The accident had taken Caleb's memories, but it couldn't take his capacity to love. He and Ethan faced the world hand in hand, their bond stronger for its scars. Caleb's sketches began to fill with new moments, Ethan's laugh, their quiet mornings, the way Ethan's eyes softened when Caleb smiled. They weren't the same men they'd been, but they were enough. And in that truth, Caleb found peace, a love reclaimed not by memory, but by choice. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. As they stood together at a pride parade, rainbow flags waving around them, Caleb felt a warmth that needed no past to justify it. Ethan's hand in his was a vow, a fire that would never go cold again. And when Caleb looked at him, he saw not a stranger, but a man who'd fought for him, flaws and a man worth fighting for in return.